Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the December 2nd, 2021 State Board of Education meeting. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. Please note that board members may be using their cell phones and laptop computers to access the agenda and information related to this meeting. Live web streaming is available through the State Board of Education website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Agenda item 1, call to order. The December 2nd, 2000 State Board meeting will now come to order. Agenda item 1.1, roll call. Andrea, please call the roll.
Patsy Kojons.
Here.
Lisa Fricke.
Here.
Patty Goobles.
Here.
Jacqueline Morrison.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Deborah Neary.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
7 present, 1 absent, or 1 vacant.
Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 1.2, please rise and join me, everyone, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Agenda item 1.3, information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main entrance doors. The Open Meetings Act is also posted on the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Agenda item 1.4, COVID-19 meeting protocol. Commissioner?
Yeah, and thank you. Just as a reminder, we are trying to follow the best protocols we know how within the space. It looks like folks are able to wear masks generally and be able to be spaced. I was going to say spaced out. That doesn't quite sound right, but I am already. So just appreciate respecting others' needs around this. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Agenda item 2, the Commissioner's report. Commissioner, I'll let you do items 2.1 to 2.2.
Yeah.
2.3, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, item 2.1, just as our normal routine of consent agenda, we have one item that we're going to remove from consent agenda. That's item 5.3.A, and we will move that to additional business and otherwise take up consent agenda otherwise as amended there. I guess the next part, a little report on rules, which is actually in your materials. We have one rule awaiting approval from the Attorney General's office. That's Rule 24. And then another rule approved as a hearing draft, which is Rule 51. And so both of those are noticed in your board materials. And then I believe I'm going to invite Ryan Four up to maybe not talk so much about board operations, but opportunity to invite some to introduce some special guests.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Ryan Four. About a month ago, not that long, it was a few weeks ago, a teacher called me who teaches an Introduction to Education course at Ralston High School. And she indicated that her students have been watching the State Board of Education via live stream. And these are students presumably who might have an interest in the education profession. And so as part of that, she's teaching them about the governance structures and wanted an opportunity to come to the State Board meeting. Of course, it being a public meeting, knew that they could come anytime, but saw this opportunity here for the December State Board meeting to really see in person how you work. And the teacher is Rebecca Dunn at Ralston High School, and I'm going to ask her to come up so that she can briefly share a little bit more with you all about her program and the students who she has here with us today. And she might even share a little bit more about what else they did in Lincoln today. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca Dunn.
Good afternoon. As Ryan said, I'm Rebecca Dunn. I'm a teacher with Royalston Schools. I've been there about 14 years, and this is probably the 6th or 7th year that I've run the Education Academy. And so that entails the Introduction to Ed class, which is offered as a dual enrollment through both UNO and Metro Community College, the Best Practices class, and a Future Teacher Internship program. And so as part of that, we learned not only about the governance and the structure of the school system, public school system, all the way from the secretary down to the local school level of governance. We talk about the finance, but we also went to the university today and we checked out the College of Education at a Division I school, and so it was a really great opportunity to meet the department chair and to spend some time on campus. So we are appreciative of the time that you've entertained us by being allowed to attend today, and we look forward to learning more about you. Thank you.
Let's show some appreciation for these students. And for Ms. Dunn, their teacher. Thank you.
I just want to share for the students, it's so great to see you here, but I'm not sure why you're all sitting in the back. This isn't church, folks. But this is awesome that you're here, and perhaps one day one of you or one or more of you will be sitting up here on the State Board of Education, so we welcome you here. What's the matter? Agenda item 4, the President's Report. And I'll keep this short and simple, I guess. First off, it's great to have these students here today. It's always wonderful to see those people that we're working for. But I so appreciated this morning having the opportunity for our board to meet with the Post-Secondary Education Commission. We haven't been able to meet in person for 2 or 3 years. So it was nice to meet up with them. And as I was preparing a welcome introductory and kind of a summary of what the board has been doing the last couple of years, it was amazing to me as I looked back and reflected and reviewed. I don't think we often enough realize how much work we've been working on, or all the work that the department and the staff are doing on a daily basis, along with the commissioner out there in the field being the face of the NDE. I just found it amazing as I looked over everything, and I didn't even touch everything, but to think about all the things and that we've done. I so appreciate all of you for your commitment and your dedication. That's really important. And I just want to say thank you again to the board members who represented the board at the statewide education conference, 2 weeks ago, the 4 that were on the panel. I heard lots of good things from it all, so thank you again. And with that, I just want to say it doesn't feel like it's December yet, especially with the weather outside and the warmth in here. But the holidays are upon us, and I just want to make sure I wish each of you, in case I don't let you know personally, a wonderful holiday season, and the same to the commissioner and the department staff. You're all great. You're all appreciated. Thank you. Agenda item 5, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Patsy?
I move to accept the consent agenda.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Patty. Motion was made by Patsy, seconded by Patty. Per board policy, there is no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda. Andrea, please call the roll.
Fricke,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Kojons.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6, standing committee reports. 6.1, Policy Committee, and as acting chair, I will give the report. If I can get it pulled up here. The Committee on Policy met on December 2nd, earlier today, and reports that the committee has 1 action item and 2 discussion items. The committee discussed the proposed state board meeting schedule for 2022. After discussion, the committee recommends maintaining present circumstance by keeping the state board meeting dates as outlined in B5. Meeting the first Thursday and Friday of each month except January, or as otherwise determined by the board. The committee recommends that the full board approve this schedule at their business meeting today. The committee continues discussion of State Board Policy P5, contracts, grants, and purchases. The committee recommends that the NDE staff and this committee continue discussion of revision to this policy in 2022. The committee continues discussion of State Board Policy P11, data access and use. NDE staff indicated that the NDE General Counsel and Records Officer will discuss a strategy of restructuring this policy and bring an outline to the committee in February of 2022. The committee discussed State Board Internal Policy P7, teaching certificates, and recommend that this policy be allowed to sunset and the NDE and Policy Committee Board consider a position statement to encompass the priorities and vision of what the NDE and board want regarding Nebraska's teaching professionals in 2022. The committee also recommends the discussion of restructuring the State Board Policy Reference Manual, the restructuring of it continue in February of 2022. This concludes the Policy Committee report. Agenda item 6.1. Is there a motion on item 6.1?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I move to approve the State Board meeting schedule for 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Patty, seconded by Robin. Is there any discussion on the motion? Patty?
Yes, I just want to point out that the intent is that we will have at least 2 state board meetings next year that will be held outside of Lincoln.
Thank you. Any other further discussion? Robin?
Just for clarification, I want to make sure that the 1 month that we are not meeting is July, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Kojons,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6.1B. Board members, is there any discussion on item 6.1B referencing State Board Internal Policy P5, contracts, grants, and purchases? Okay. Agenda item 6.1C. Board members, is there any discussion on item 6.1C related to State Board Internal Policy P11, data access and use? Okay. Agenda item 6.2. Robin, would you please provide a report from the Legislative Committee meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really want to reemphasize what you already touched on, and that was the coordinating commission, post-secondary education, the early morning meeting that we had with those folks. And I really appreciated your comments. I appreciated the executive director's comments from the coordinating commission, and I did appreciate also the historical perspective from the commissioner. So I just thought that those things were well done and really added to our discussion. As far as our committee, we had just really a very good meeting as we met with the Nebraska ASCD. Mitch Kubicek is their executive director, and we had a wonderful hour and a half conversation about education, and that was really fun. I have asked each of the members of the legislative committee to think of one thing, and I suppose if you have more than one, I would allow that too, or if the chair would allow that as well. Patsy, would you lead us off and tell us one thing or more of things that you found just enlightening, or something you would like to share with us?
Well, Robin, you know I'm not a really good person for one thing, but I'll do my best. Okay, so what was the most enlightening to me as we discussed our legislative priorities was the fact that a lot of them connected to each other. And so what we had decided as legislative priorities, they were also had decided about them as well. But the big aha moment for me in the meeting was when they said that we cannot solve any of the problems that we have as our legislative priorities in this state until we settle the problem of the shortage of teachers and staff. And until we figure that out, which you all know involves a lot of things like credentialing and the praxis and allowing teachers from other states to come into our schools. And so that they said, well, what else could we do without having all of that happen so that we have enough teachers in our classroom? And there was quite a large group of them, and they were all shaking their heads yes. So I thought that was probably the biggest aha moment. And the fact that the thing that they wanted most from us was to be heard.
Thank you. Deborah?
Thank you. It was a great discussion today. And one of the things that I took away, well, yes, they made it very clear that the teacher shortage affects all these other items. And so that is the most urgent priority. But one of the things that I heard in our discussion with them about legislative priorities, but also it was brought up this morning at the CCPE meeting, this word keeps popping up, and they both talked about the whole body health. And I loved that they were prioritizing a child's whole body health as a high priority in this whole education process, because, and this morning they had discussed, where one of the actions that were taken was a program that provided eyeglasses for students that have vision problems. And, a student can't learn if they can't see the board. And there were so many other things that were discussed at noon in our legislative meeting about whole body health policy issues that are important. And I think that packaging that information that way is really helpful, because there's a lot of words out there that have become toxic and there's, misinformation behind them. But when we just talk about these very simple things that we can do to support students so that they're in a better position to learn, then, the research shows that we know that's going to make a difference. And so that was a big takeaway for me. But also just the fact that our legislative priorities and theirs almost lined up perfectly really affirms for me that we are on the right track and focused on, some important priorities. So thank you.
Lisa?
You sure you don't want to go first?
Well, no, I'll let you go.
It was a wonderful meeting, a lot of conversation that I appreciated. Echoing what Patty said and what Deborah said, I agree with that. One of the things was mental health, social emotional learning tied into the shortages. Among the shortages are counselors, social workers that could provide what the students need with social emotional learning. And they also recommended, if I'm getting my meetings right, we had 2 of them today, the coordinating council and the chamber working together on social emotional learning and getting that out there. And if you think about it, a lot of social emotional learning are those soft skills that businesses and trades are looking for, such as problem solving, critical thinking, empathy, and so many that would help any child in any position that they chose, whether it's career or college path. And also, they had asked if we could simplify some of the things moving forward. Of course, we can't change the federal mandates or constitutional or legislative mandates, but asking us to do things like that and ask us to be a united team as a state board. And so those are the takeaways that I have.
I should have went first. You rascal! You took my stuff.
Go ahead and say your stuff, please.
No, obviously just lots of things, but I was really impressed with the leadership of. It makes you feel like, and these are leaders from across the state. That our educational system is really in good hands. These people were very impressive, and I just that really jumped out at me. I think it was Patsy that asked the question, okay, what can we do as a state board? And the one that really hit me, and I think it bears repeating, is stability by the state board, unity by the state board. Sometimes that's maybe stuff that it kind of hits you and doesn't necessarily make you feel real good at that moment, but the more you stop and you think about it, it really hit home to me. And then the other thing that they thought, that, and I have heard it before, consistency and simplicity, I think, were the 2 words that I think about, that they were really, how can we make, for example, the teacher shortage, how can we make that simpler? How can we be more consistent in the things that we do? So those were the things. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Did I miss somebody?
Oh, no.
Whew. All right, thank you.
Agenda item 6.3, the Commissioner's Appraisal Report, and that's me again. Okay, the Appraisal Committee reports, it's been working on refinements to the appraisal process for this next year. The Commissioner's job description has been streamlined to reduce redundancy in the performance appraisal process. The number of essential job functions has been reduced from 9 to 4. That will translate in the number of performance appraisal rating areas decreasing from 10 to 5. 4 essential functions plus goals. Performance evidence will be provided in a single document just prior to the onset of the appraisal process instead of on a quarterly basis. And that concludes the Appraisal Committee report. Jacqueline?
So I have a couple of questions. When you say that the process was streamlined and we went from having a certain amount of criteria to fewer criteria, I guess my question is, how was that decided? And, you know, what's our policy that governs how those kinds of decisions are made?
Well, there was a lot of redundancy on the process, on the appraisal itself. I mean, I recall going, I think I've already answered that one earlier. And so we narrowed it down, and the commissioner, you had a little input in on that to reduce the number as well, where you saw some redundancy as well.
I actually think we talked about this in the spring, about trying to, because there were just some of those items that seemed like you're answering the same question over and over again. And it doesn't mean that any of that goes away, it just gets into kind of 4 buckets instead of 9 buckets, basically.
Okay, so I don't think my question was answered, so I'm going to ask, who ultimately made the decision to change the metric? And what is our board governing policy about who gets to make the decisions regarding the metric?
Well, it's a process that we put into place 4 or 5 years ago. We used to just have a checklist. And we went through a process, I don't remember what we looked at to come up with the metrics of everything that we rated him on. But that's what we've continued to use since then, because it is so much more thorough than what we had prior. And it was the appraisal committee that made that decision to reduce from, was it 9 down to 4? It was the committee, which was composed of Vice President Co-Johns, myself, and Pat Tim.
Typically, when a committee decides something, it becomes an action item that's brought to the board for the board to vote on. And so I haven't voted on that. And if that's not following the policy that we have generally, where is that board policy B7, B9, where is it written that the appraisal committee makes these decisions and what that process is for the assessment and things like that regarding the commissioner's appraisal?
I'm not sure, Jacqueline, that it's written anywhere. That determination was made several years ago to have an appraisal committee. That was a new committee formed.
And so if,
Pardon? Brian?
Are you asking about bylaw B2 that establishes the committee? Because in that bylaw, it describes what the Commissioner's Appraisal Committee is charged with doing.
I'll bring it up.
Okay.
I think Robin wants to
Yeah,
say
okay.
something.
Is it okay if I go ahead with Robin? Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, while she's taking some time, what would probably be somewhat beneficial is if we had that instrument on Spark so that you know we would know for sure what we're talking about. That would be beneficial to me. So I don't know if that's possible or not.
This was just an update to give you, because you'll be getting all of that information in the next 2 or 3 months,
And then
to be able to see all that ahead of time, yes.
as we look at the rule here, and Jacqueline or Brian may have it, is there a vote then that is taken related to that, is according to policy or not? Okay.
Not to my recollection, is there a vote taken on it?
Okay.
So I pulled up the policy, which the deputy commissioner referred me to, and it says proposals for procedures and instruments to review the performance of the Commissioner of Education shall be approved by the board. And then it says also, the appraisal committee shall, when directed by the board or board president, review or recommend policies and procedures for review of performance of the commissioner. The way I read that, any changes or change to that is a change to the proposal for the procedure or the instrument, change the instrument, which is brought to the board.
Okay. Well, I will ensure that it is brought to the board in February. I'll have the appraisal committee meet again before the start of the year to be able to bring that information in a proper manner to you.
I think she was first.
Deborah, then Lisa.
Oh, yeah, and when you bring it, will we be able to see what was removed in addition to what you're being proposed, or is being proposed?
We should be able to,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. That's not my question, though. Like everybody else here, I spend a lot of my free time learning about what are the best practices in all areas of the work that we do. And I really enjoyed attending a session at the NASB conference a few weeks ago, where they had a whole session on evaluating your superintendent, because that's a really big deal. And even though our commissioner isn't a superintendent, there's a lot of similarities in being a very public leadership role. And I learned that NASB has a person who on their staff that works with any school district that wants this support, and they come in and come up with the plan for how the superintendent is evaluated. And our world is changing so fast, and I know that, however, the initial plan was established, I don't know if we used outside HR professionals to help us, or if that was developed internally. But regardless, as long as I've been on the board, it feels like we've just tinkered with the same strategy year after year. And I wonder if a part of the process couldn't be to bring in somebody who we don't have the expertise on the board, as a HR professional that works with evaluating superintendents or people at that level. And I wonder if that shouldn't be a discussion, just as and not to say that there's anything wrong with our process, but it hasn't really been reviewed in my knowledge, other than some tinkering that we're doing with it. But there's just a lot of new research out there and new ways of approaching evaluations. And so I just wondered if there's any thought about that.
Well, from a historical perspective,
Yeah.
Deborah, I can tell you that when I first came on the board, it was simply a checklist.
Okay.
There was nothing substantial about it whatsoever. And I didn't feel like it was worthy of taking even the time to do it. And so since then, under the leadership of past presidents, that all came to be, and whether they worked with the HR or looked to, you mentioned NASB, you meant NASB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe they may have gone and gotten information from our national affiliate, NASB, to work on looking at what other states do in their evaluation system. But I could be wrong on that as well.
I wonder if we could verify that. But regardless, is it something that the tools that we use should be discussed with some external expert every once in a while. And I don't know if it's every 5 years or if it's, I don't know what that answer is, but depending on when the last time was that we had some external expertise weigh into the process, I mean, I just think that would be a consideration.
Robin? Or no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
That's okay. Maybe I misunderstood what your report said, but I was looking at what you said as an update of changes, and that down the road, we'd be able to see the product that you have
Yes, I mentioned
finalized
that, yeah.
in committee and then vote on it. Is that correct?
I will review all of that and be able to get back to you. I
Okay,
will
because
send
that-
you information out on that
Because
to the
that
whole board.
seems to be that, I was on the appraisal committee when they changed it, and Tim was on there. And there was an external source, but I don't know who it was.
Right.
And that checklist wasn't doing it. It wasn't an accurate appraisal.
No.
And now, what we have now is a very broader opportunity for sharper critiques or applause, so to speak, and that the commissioner has to, for each category, provide a document of proof
Yes,
at the end, and they've made that simpler for us to check into.
Right.
So a question, we go to look at the proof of that source, then we go back and answer it, and then we have a chance for narrative. Prior to this, there was no proof from the commissioner, which he has
there were
now.
no
and all you-
artifacts. There were no
Yeah,
artifacts.
Artifacts. And so you could click on that, read the document, and then answer the question, A, B, C, D, very strong, whatever, and then comment on what you have for a letter. So that was great improvement, and I thought there was an outside source too, I can't remember. But I just thought today you were just giving an update that you changed it, and we'll vote on it later.
And one of the things that we especially liked when we were looking at this and looking at some changes that we could make, because we had discussed them right after we did the evaluation and the commissioner's contract last summer, was instead of having those 4 quarterly reports to have to go back in and look at each one of them, there is just one full report to go back and look at. So, which makes it a lot easier for all of us when we go to look at the artifacts. Patty?
Yeah, it's always been important for me, regardless of whom the evaluation applies to be able to make sure there's alignment between the professional's position description.
Yes.
And the evaluation. So I guess whenever you share the update, if you would also share with us the position description, because that's
Okay.
really helpful to me.
Thank you. Patsy?
One of the things we discussed in the appraisal meeting was, actually it's two things, but that new board members are asked to evaluate our commissioner, after knowing very little about it. It's just like a short amount of time. And I can remember my first year thinking, how am I to answer these questions if I don't know? And so we discussed that, and I think we decided that we should probably put some places in there where a person could say, I haven't observed this particular area for the commissioner yet, and so I don't feel comfortable or whatever about presenting it. The only problem we had with that, so all of the great minds in here can chew on this for a while, is does that give a person an opt-out to express an opinion? In other words, they don't want to say, and so I don't know, but it certainly has been something that's been brought up over and over again, and so it might be a problem that we want to address.
I add one thing. First of all, I think it's really important, right, that the board evaluates my work and understands that work, and we have that common sense of what the understanding of that work is, right? And I do think that this is a legitimate review. So I appreciate what Deborah was talking about. Like, there probably should be some cycle to this too. So in addition to that, it just would happen. I think the committee, at least in conversations over the years, not even just the current one, has made these kind of subtle shifts in how that appraisal process worked, with some idea that, hey, look, we'd hear feedback from board members, and I was like, oh, that was too much to deal with, or, you know, could you organize it a little bit differently? And so I think over the last couple of years, that was the intention, but I think also, very good point by Jacqueline around what's the policy say, how's that supposed to work? And so all of that makes good sense to me. I like the idea of some cycle of that would be reviewed and modernized and things along those lines too, because my recollection of how this kind of appraisal process came to be was at the time Dr. Rachel Wise was on the board, and that was a bit of, she served in that role for a while, then handed it off to the next president and kept evolving. I think Robin was briefly on the appraisal committee. It's one of these things that it's just like, it evolves kind of maybe in a more, I'll call it grassroots type of way. And I would actually appreciate that a process that you feel comfortable with, that I can also feel comfortable with, because that's good for us as an organization.
Jacqueline?
So kind of along these lines, I'm certain of what I heard, and it was that changes were made and it was not going to be a vote. So we can finagle words as much as we want to, but I know what the intent was said. But beyond that, the reason for which I initially said something or brought it up is because I attended the same discussion that Deb Neary went to. And I think what's giving me pause with this appraisal committee is that it actually kind of goes against what was discussed in that workshop. And I'm pretty sure that I heard the lady say she developed the rubric that's being used, and she had it patented or copyrighted. As a lawyer, I should know which one, but I don't. Probably both. But her concern is that, or she didn't say her concern, but she wanted everybody, specifically board members, to understand that the commissioner doesn't have one boss in the president of the board, or one boss, two bosses in the president and the vice president, or four in the appraisal committee. It's all 8 board members. And so we all need to be consistently evaluating this process and evaluating the commissioner. And as I think about my personal professional life, if I only got evaluated one time of year, and that was the end of the year, and someone wasn't happy with what I did at the end of the year, I never had an opportunity to know that they weren't happy with my performance or to improve it. It all goes down to a one end of the year evaluation. And I think if we take ourselves out of this context and think about how are we good employers to our employee, and think about it that way, how are we consistently communicating with the commissioner, letting him know how we think that he is doing, and giving him room to improve, whether that be quarterly, semi-annually. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not an HR professional, but I do think that there is some room for improvement if we're just filtering things through the appraisal committee, and then at the end of the year, we all get one time to give suggestions or feedback. So I'm concerned that what I hear so often from board members is, well, this is a lot better than what we had. And I don't think this is to be critical of the improvement, but we should always be thinking about how to better improve, how to further a process. And I think we need to really, this is a place where I think we need to put a lot of our attention. And if consistently people are going to tell me we've got one job and that's to hire and fire the commissioner, then maybe a lot more of our time needs to be spent evaluating the commissioner and what he's doing. And so, again, this is not a critique on the commissioner either, but it really, I almost stood up in my seat when I heard the words, well, the commissioner and I went through this and took this out. I can't go to my boss's office and tell them what of me to change in my evaluation or criteria. That's something that my bosses would do. And so that's something that the board has to consider. And I think a lot of our, if I can remember correctly, because I was so new to the board when we were doing that first evaluation, I think we get those surveys from staff, from people who work for the commissioner. That's something that we as a board need to be initiating, not staff. And so, and this is not coming from me, this is coming from from the workshop that we attended and from the Association of School Boards in Nebraska. So I think that even if we were to go get an outside expert when they came in, this is what their thoughts would be, or at least this is what I heard from them. And as I started thinking about this outside of the board context, I think we need to kind of reconsider our processes here, our policies here, and really try to not just defend the improvement that we've made, but hopefully 3 years from now we can sit and say, we came this far in 3 more years.
Deborah, then Robin.
I'll follow Robin. Go ahead.
Your hand was up first, Deborah.
One of the other things, it's now coming back to me, some of the things that I heard in that session. And one of the things that kind of resonated with me was that a lot of superintendents are having a 360 review. And, you know, there's appropriate ways to do that. But like since, you know, the superintendents across the state spend more time with, you know, our commissioner than we do, you know, is there a reason to have a sampling, have some input? Or should there be a sampling of parents that are allowed to have input? Or, I mean, there's so many different stakeholder groups, and I know that could, you know, get out of control. And I guess I just wanted to throw it out there that is part of a normal superintendent process, and is there something along those lines? And what made me think of it is I just remember a few years ago, there was a question about, you know, does the commissioner, what's his relationship with the staff? I know it wasn't worded like that, and I was like, well, I don't know. You know, I mean, it was, and maybe that question isn't on there anymore, but it did make me think like, and again, there's challenges to having a staff evaluate, you know, their supervisor. And so that all, I think an HR expert, you know, who works in this field would certainly have some guidance for us if there was an interest in just expanding the way we do it. Thank you.
Robin?
Been a lot of things said here. I'm not sure I know how to respond to all of them. So I'm going to just respond to one or two. First of all, I came in at my very first year. I was on the appraisal committee. Tim, or Tim, spent tremendous amount of time with outside people in putting this plan together. I know Joel Sherling is a very important person as far as implementing the process. So I want to make sure that we understand that this hasn't just been a internal thing that the commissioner and Tim got together and said, let's make this thing. That's not true at all. They brought in outside sources, and it was done under best practices. So I want to make sure that you understand. Now, That being said, does that mean it can't be looked at again? Absolutely not. My biggest concern is that we are, as I understand it, removing basically about half of the existing process, 4 out of the 10 categories. What I would really like to have is on Spark is an example of that, so I know a little bit more what you're really saying. That would be my big issue.
Well, Patsy, correct me if I'm wrong. As we looked at downsizing the number, we compacted from some that we were taking, headings that we were taking away and moving them into another category so that there just wasn't all these different 9 categories.
I'm not sure if we did that with every single statement that was in the appraisal, but I know we did with some. We talked about putting them in those 4 categories as opposed to having the large number of categories for people to try and handle the
Condense
information
it
in.
down, just condensing it down. Because there was a great deal of redundancy within the appraisal.
I'm not doubting that. I guess what I am saying is I would just like to see a copy.
We will make sure that you see it.
And I think Deborah made mention, with the strikeout or however, that would be very helpful to me.
Okay. I will make sure that that happens. Patsy?
I also think that we're running into a lot of things where we've done them this way for a very long time, and they're coming forward. And I also think that it would be a good idea that we somehow send this to the policy committee and establish a procedure for how we do this. Does it come to the full board for a vote afterwards? And if so, where is it written that it does, so that we're not guessing? Because we were using tradition to make the process, and I'm not sure if that's exactly how we should be doing it. I want you to know that the intent was not, there was no secretness in it, no hidden agenda, nothing like that. It was just, and you've all heard it 1,000 times, that's the way it's always been.
And I just want to make sure that while we would have the commissioner on some of our calls, his was just to say, does this sound like something that would work for you or you could live with? And when we brought it to his attention about narrowing down the topics or the headings, whatever we want to call them, he was really good with it. He said, I agree, there's just a lot of redundancy in it. So did we take his suggestions? If I made it sound like that, no, we worked it on it as a 3-committee group. Robin?
Yeah, I just appreciate the discussion. Appreciate you bringing it forward. I think it's, Patsy said sometimes we get into tradition, and it's good to take a good hard look at those traditions. Wasn't there a musical or something that had?
I was going to say, I think Tevye would agree with us.
Okay, all right.
Anything else? Okay. Agenda item 6.4. Lisa, please provide a report from the AQuESTT Teaching, Learning, and Serving Domain Committee meeting.
The Committee on Teaching, Learning, and Serving reports on 2 action items and 1 discussion item. The first action item is to adopt the annual plan for the Nebraska statewide assessment reporting system. And I'm going to say reporting system, not anything planned. It's a reporting system. Per Nebraska Revised Statute 79760.03, the board is required to adopt this for which policy decisions have previously been determined by the board. The committee reviewed the report and recommends adoption of this report. The second action item to adopt a resolution to recognize Nebraska educators. The idea of this resolution was discussed at the November meeting as a gesture to recognize the efforts of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, support staff, and other educational professionals. The committee reviewed the draft resolution and recommends the adoption of it. One discussion item was on the committee agenda related to the revision of college, career, and ready standards for mathematics. The committee heard updates and information about the standards revision process from NDE staff. The NDE staff will provide a presentation to the full board today during discussion on this topic. Board members are encouraged to review the provided information, including the revision timeline and information about the revision team. The committee also had a brief discussion on student voice and may bring this topic forward at a future time. And that concludes my report, President Nichols.
Lisa, is there a motion on item 6.4A?
Yes, Madam President, I move to adopt the annual plan for the Nebraska statewide assessment and reporting system. I move to adopt that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Lisa and seconded by Patty. Any discussion on the motion?
Can you summarize that for me, please?
I think the best person to do that would be Dr. Epler, because he's involved in it specifically.
Thank you.
Annual requirement to report to the legislature on our statewide summative assessment. The word plan is kind of misleading because we're essentially reporting on what we've done previously. So as you read that information, there is a description of the work that's happened on summative assessment, yes, yet also some of the psychometric requirements of summative assessment by Nebraska law, including the correlation to nationally normed assessments. So it gets pretty technical pretty quick, but this is something we submit every year at this time to the legislature as a requirement of the law to report back on what we did previously on summative assessment.
Any other questions or discussion? Patty?
Yeah, I appreciated being able to read through the summary because it really reminded me of what we have done with assessment in 2020, 2021. I had not previously seen any correlational data related to what we use for a national test is map growth. So it was really to map growth with our NSCAS. And it's really good. I don't know what other word to use, but to see that all of the correlations were a +8 something. That's a very high relationship between those scores on both of those assessments. So I think it really reinforces for us that our NSCAS is in fact measuring what it needs to measure.
Any other board member? Okay, seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Nichols,
Yes.
Fricke,
Yes.
Goebbels,
Yes?
Kojans,
Whoops. Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
7 yes, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6.4B, resolution to recognize Nebraska educators. Whereas Nebraska public and non-public PK through 12 educators, including teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, support staff, and others in the education profession have experienced extreme workplace challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas Nebraska PK-12 educators continue to design and implement innovative learning strategies to ensure students continue to receive high-quality educational experiences despite the challenges brought about by the pandemic. Whereas Nebraska PK-12 educators have worked tirelessly to prioritize in-person learning for students, leading the nation in both the 2021 and 2021-2022 school years. Whereas Nebraska PK-12 educators continue to work above and beyond expectations to serve students, families, and communities to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of students in and out of the classroom. And whereas Nebraska PK-12 educators have persisted through 3 challenging school years and continue to serve all students entrusted to their charge. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education recognizes Nebraska PK-12 educators for their commitment, dedication, and perseverance to their students, families, and the communities in which they serve. The State Board of Education recognizes the unsung efforts of Nebraska PK-12 educators and the importance of their work to providing high-quality learning experiences for all students in all of Nebraska's schools. Do I have a motion to adopt this resolution?
Did you have a question? Okay. I move to adopt the resolution to recognize Nebraska educators.
Do I have a second? Patsy?
Second.
The motion was made by Lisa and seconded by Patsy. Is there any discussion on this motion? Deborah?
Yeah, our teachers have been through so much, as you are recognizing with this resolution, and I definitely think it's important to point out and recognize. But for any teachers that might be watching this, it's like I would like to send a message of that this isn't, that there's going to be action behind these words, that, you know, resolutions can sometimes be the end product and people can feel good, well, we, you know, had a resolution, and it's like, I wonder if your committee members could comment on what are some of the actions that we're going to put into place that carry out the idea that we really care about our teachers in Nebraska.
Patsy?
One thing that I wanted to say is that I've had some teachers come to me this year and visit with me. And in my mind, it was, well, we made it through last year, so now everything is better. And what I'm hearing from them, and I don't know, I've heard some of you say the same thing, is that it is not better. And in many ways, it is more and more difficult every day. And these are from teachers that are highly recognized for their efforts and their teaching, and that I think we need to pay attention to. And Matt, I know you meet with teacher groups, and I don't know if you're hearing anything like that, but there are things happening in our schools that are great challenges for these teachers who've already been through enough. So I think we need to think long and hard about what we are doing for them. And I agree, a resolution is nice. It's like a card, a birthday card. Buy me the cake. I don't want just the card kind of thing. If I can make light of a very serious situation, and I don't want to make light of it. But they're struggling and they need some help.
Yeah.
Lisa?
I don't know if that was the same Zoom I was on, but a Zoom of several teachers from around the state. I think Deborah was on that as well. And what I heard from several of the teachers was exactly what Patsy said. It's worse than it was the year before for various reasons. And it was pointed out by several of them that, well, a couple of them for sure, that the commissioner has provided flexibility or waivers or whatever, but the superintendents aren't taking advantage of that. And so I guess it's the superintendent's choice, depending upon what he or she believes to be what is most important for their school district. So I guess it's not a criticism from me, but it's something that I think they need to be aware of. Their teachers are hurting in so many ways. Kids' behaviors, not only in our state, nationwide, the acting out is so much worse for so many reasons, including the pandemic, but beyond. So I just think that superintendents need to think about what their teachers are saying and how they're feeling. And I know many, many, many of them do, but that really struck me during that Zoom. It really did, that this year is even harder than the initial year of COVID.
Jacqueline?
I have to run to my kids' basketball game. But along these lines, and I think this is something that I've been struggling with, and part of the reason I motioned to pull the piece off the consent agenda so we could talk about it later. But when we talk about recognizing our teachers, one of the consistent things that I have heard is we lack teachers. We have not enough we don't have enough subs. There aren't enough teachers. We're having to cover. If you take a day off for a mental health day, that's great, but now you just left other teachers to have to cover because no one can cover for them. We're using our breaks to cover for other people, and if we leave our students with the sub, sometimes we don't want to leave that class with a sub, and so there's even this heaviness about taking time for yourself. And so when I think about that and what we can do, I look at these ESSER funds that we as a board have continued to pass on the consent agenda. I'm tying this to what we're talking about right now, is that one of the things that we can use the funds that we received on is professional learning in the teacher pipeline. That's a direct way that we can impact teachers, is to focus on the teacher pipeline. Yet, out of the 84 million that we have that's discretionary, it looks like we've only allocated 2.5 to that cause. And so I would encourage all of us, as we think about passing a statement and telling teachers, we care about you, we're with you, but yet we have sat back and said, out of 84 million, we're only going to invest 2.5 in fixing the pipeline that we know is a problem. So I think as we say, we're gonna send a message to teachers to let you know, that is a place we really need to be asking ourselves, are we investing in the places where we really want to make an impact? And we can continue, I can continue this discussion at a different time, but I would encourage you all to kind of think about that as we continue to allocate these funds that are specifically for, or can be used to help teachers who are struggling in the classroom.
Patty, then Patsy.
I agree that the teacher pipeline is important, but when you look at a complex problem, it is that, it's complex. Certainly the pipeline is part of it. Teachers are feeling very burned out from having to cover due to the lack of staff. But if we look at ESSER funds, we are designating funds for mental health of students and teachers. That's important, right? We are providing money to improve instructional materials, to have money for instructional materials. That's helpful when you consider that a number of the teachers I've spoken with, the concern is how much unfinished learning there is for students. And that wears on good teachers. That wears on all teachers. So I think we have to not look at this as a one solution to a complex problem, and really consider how many different areas of the problem we're trying to address.
Patsy?
I appreciate both of those perspectives and think that they are indeed something that we should think about. One of the things that was brought forward to me by a teacher is the mental health of her students at this time. And all we have to do is look around the United States and see what happened yesterday, and we can see that. So sorry that those things continue to happen. But Patty, I agree with you that we need to also be thinking about mental health and strategies for our teachers to handle things that they've never had to handle before. And it's very important information to think about, protecting our teachers, nurturing our teachers, and making sure that, that they feel like they are valued. Otherwise, why would we have anybody who in the future wants to be a teacher?
Robin, then Jacqueline.
See what you do when you ask these questions? So, but no, it's a question that really needs to be asked because I can get into that whereas result, and that makes me feel good. And so it's really a good question to ask. And here is one thing that is tangible again that I have observed, not necessarily indirectly through NDE, but I do some work with the educational service units, and what they are working on more and more through their professional development is not only mental health for students, but also for educators. So I don't know if that really answers. That's obviously not the only answer. As you know, it's a very complex, but that was something encouraging for me that the ESUs are working with schools. Schools are doing it on their own, using a lot of the funds that Jacqueline pointed out.
Deborah?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I want to get back to my original question, and that is, and it just comes from, and I know everyone around this table is feeling the same level of frustration, but I've been on the board for 3 years, and we've been talking about pathways to certification for 3 years, and I feel like there needs to be more than words, and there needs to be some action priorities. And so the 4 people in the Teaching and Learning Committee who have, you know, that's the mission of that committee, is to be working on pathways to certification and working on our teacher short. It's, I guess, what are the action steps that you've been talking about in your committee that relate to, I mean, I guess I would feel bad talking to teachers tonight to say, you know, well, we have a resolution for you. It's like, I think it's an important thing for us to do to recognize teachers, but I want to be able to share with them that, and I haven't heard from the Teaching and Learning Committee about some of the action steps that you're talking about. Now, I know your committee has been responsible for the health standards over the last 8 months, and so you've had a lot on your plate, but I know that in the last few months, I'm just kind of curious, what are some of the action priorities that you are talking about?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I answered it at our previous state board meeting with a 12-page document that Brad Dirksen had on Spark. And I don't know if this is a good time to have a staff member who knows, but they have been working on certification, licensure, flexibility, reciprocity, without taking away, you know, quality for students. So it's still being worked on, and some of the things that they've worked on are before the governor right now. It's not a policy. It goes to first the Attorney General to make sure the legality of it is correct. Then it goes to the governor, and I know that one item is still unless we get in the commissioner's report tomorrow. I don't know, there were 2 that were waiting to be signed, and I don't know if they're both signed now related to, is it Rule
24 is
Or
the
at
one
24,
that's-
I was gonna
it's
say
in front of
20.
the Attorney General's
Yeah.
office right now.
Matt?
I just want to add, so to me, it's not just the Teaching and Learning Committee, it's actually the full board. So there are other items in front of the Legislative Committee, for instance, right, that I think address this. And I think it's a great point of conversation, but there are actually many things that I think are really important to teachers. When I've had my teacher advisory group, I do think this has been a very difficult year for a lot of different reasons for our teachers, in part because so many people think we're back to normal, and it's not normal yet. This is most challenging time. I know in March of 2020, I said there would be years of recovery from this pandemic. I kind of took some heat in the media at that point in time around, oh, it's not really years, you know. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're suffering through something that's pretty dramatic in as far as the impacts. I think we've done a remarkable job. I think our teachers have done an absolutely remarkable job. But there are supports there. I think to the other points about the investments that are being made in professional learning and otherwise, I think as we go through that, it's a continued effort to think through. Teachers need live bodies. That's what I've heard from my advisory group, the folks that come together and say what they really needed was flexibility so they can make sure that there were more substitutes and more flexibility around that. More opportunities for folks to enter the profession in different ways. And so I think that whole list of things are things we're doing, but it doesn't have the immediate result to support teachers in a way that we would love to be able to do in some cases. And so continue to look at it, continue to discuss it, I think is really important.
Lisa? Then Robin.
Along those lines, I know that one of the colleges outside the metro area has a satellite class in Omaha, and there's a cadre of paras who are training to be teachers. One of the things we could do for the entire state is encourage more of that. You know, have cadres of para to professional teacher. The paras in the direction that they're going to get their education is exactly what they're doing in the classrooms for teachers, but on the para side, you know, where they are more assistive, but they're learning, and they're good with assisting the teacher, but they want to teach. So we need to somehow, as a board, encourage more of that kind of pathway, para to professional teacher. And then also find paths to get people into the teacher workforce. And it can't start in high school. The idea needs to even start in elementary. You know, with the idea, I think of all the wonderful things that their teachers do and their stories about education they could read and have more discussions and encourage pathways to teachers teaching through middle school. And I would love to see the NEA Educator Rising go down to the middle school. But guess what? It takes funding. Any of these things that I mentioned take funding. And that's a sad thing when money is the cause that some wonderful things of need aren't happening. And that's frustrating. So I don't know. If you have any other ideas to share what we can do for teachers, I'd love to hear it.
Deborah, then Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I know I refer back to something Patty said a few minutes ago that, and you referred to it too in the 12-page report that you gave last month, that this is a very complex challenge, and there is no simple answer. And there's a lot of things happening simultaneously. I guess my little small brain just wonders if I could ask the question in a different way. Like, do you think that, so there's a lot of talk about reciprocal certifications. There was a lot of talk about that, whatever that human growth and learning class or whatever it is that's a requirement. There's been some talk about the praxis. Those are three things that I remember from the report. Do you think we're going to have some action steps towards any of those probably in the next 4 to 6 months?
As what I keep up with in researching for the teaching and learning, I think so. And one of the things that is leading up to that reciprocity, we've already taken a step to ensure that military spouses have that opportunity coming in from another state. So that opens the window of opportunity for more teachers. So knowing that we can do that in that area, I have hope. I know that we probably will keep praxis, but at least 2 other alternatives of ways without losing quality, so I believe that in the next 6 months could be in place. Just depends. We still have to deal with Rule 10, accountability, approval, and accreditation. But the staff isn't sitting idle. They're all working every day, and a lot of it's towards the things that you mentioned, as it should be. And so I just appreciate all their work and the things that have gone to the governor that were signed, and kind of sad about the things that may have not been signed. But we're making progress, and how that progress looks in the next 6 months, I hope is actionable.
Okay. I'm going to refocus where we should be, and that is there's a motion on the floor to adopt the resolution to recognize Nebraska educators, and we've gotten off topic. So we've got the motion made by Patsy, right?
No, did I make it?
Seconded by Lisa, seconded by Patsy. Okay. Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Goebbels,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Kojons,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Morrison. 6 yes, 1 absent, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 6.4C. Board members, is there any discussion on item 6.4C, which is Nebraska College and Career Ready Standards for Mathematics?
Corey has the presentation that he would like to give on the Nebraska College and Career Ready Standards for Mathematics. Thank you, Dr. Epler.
Yeah, thank you. Drew, I'll let you switch me over. We talked briefly last month in the full board about the revision to Nebraska's 2015 College and Career Ready Standards for Mathematics, and wanted to come back to the full board today with an update on the process and reiterating some of the conversations that we had in committee this morning. I do want to acknowledge my staff that are with me and were part of the committee this morning. Deborah Monick is our mathematics education specialist, and you probably also remember Dr. Marissa Pazant as our ELA specialist. She's switching roles, or has switched officially, and doing both roles. She's going to serve as the Assistant Office Administrator for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, and will provide additional support, guidance, and leadership for content area standards and instruction. So I will say that if you weren't in the committee this morning, you missed fun. We actually did math and talked about math in a way that was a good model for how we hope mathematics instruction happens in our classrooms. And I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. I don't want folks to raise their hands, but this is also for the board and the folks behind me and those at home. Just answer the question in your head. Have I ever said I'm not a math person? And I imagine if I had you raise your hand, we would probably be 70, 80% of folks in the room may have said that they have said that. And what's interesting is, to think about is if we've said that, we may have heard students say that. Students in our own classroom, students that we interact with in our families, and that's a really critical mindset that's important to address as we think about how do we actually improve mathematics instruction. And I want to really just for a minute talk about that, because as we continue to work through improvement in processes with our standards ad hoc, I recognize that that work is happening at the same time as this work, but what we're trying to do is being mindful of some of the considerations and requests from that committee, also to embed it in this process. So I will say we do and have always had a continuous improvement mindset as it relates to the process. That being said, I also want to acknowledge that standards are one part of our instructional system and what happens in a classroom. And that was mentioned earlier as we think about the connection between instructional materials, teacher content knowledge, teacher pedagogical content knowledge, individualized supports for students, and how all of those pieces come together. So while we're thinking about standards as starting that framework, there's also many other, I would also say, policy considerations as we think about how do we actually improve teaching and learning in mathematics. I started this morning with just a reminder of the mission statement of the Department of Education, and again, that's really critical as we think about mathematics instruction, this idea of learning, earning, and living for all Nebraskans. Real quickly, too, just a reminder of the state board statutory requirements as it relates to mathematics standards. You are required to adopt measurable academic content standards in ELA, mathematics, science, and social studies, and we review and revise those 4 areas every 7 years. What that means from a local district perspective, as this is also reflected in our accreditation rule, is that districts in those areas either adopt the state-approved standards or standards that are deemed equal to or more rigorous than those standards. I want to just kind of also start with kind of a state of where we're at relative to the 2015 standards, since I recognize it's been a few years since those standards were approved by the board. Those standards were approved by the board on September 4th of 2015. One of the things that's important to note about this set of standards is for the first time, they were designated as college and career-ready standards by our post-secondary systems. So we had letters of support from our university system, our state colleges, our private and independent university and colleges, as well as our community colleges, that the standards, if mastered, would allow a student to be successful and enter into credit-bearing coursework at a post-secondary institution without the need for remediation. We are required to assess these standards by the summative assessment in grades 3 through 8, which is NSCAS, and then in grade 11, which is the ACT. In terms of just some data, it's been tough to really understand where we're at relative to this set of standards. The first year we assessed the 2015 standards was in the 17-18 school year. We were about 51 proficiency statewide, up to 52% that following year, and then you can see the impact that COVID-19 has had on the statewide assessments. We will have data released next week on the 2021 data from NSCAS, but we're also being mindful it can't be compared to previous years because of some of the modifications that were made as a result of the pandemic. Another piece of data that I wanted to highlight, and I appreciate the mention of instructional materials, and over the past really 4 or 5 years, the department has continued to elevate the role high-quality instructional materials play in our schools. And we've been collecting data over the last 3 years as to what instructional materials districts are using for ELA, mathematics, and science at the elementary, middle, and high school. And so we're able to use the reports from EdReports, which is a national nonprofit that does independent reviews of instructional materials for alignment and usability. So you can see the progress that we've made over the last 3 years, and just looking at elementary mathematics, where in 2019-2020, 27 school districts were using instructional materials that were rated as meeting the expectations for alignment. And this year we have 98. So when we talk about the supports we can provide educators, one of them is actually ensuring they have high quality instructional materials. That's a research-based practice that ultimately we know makes our teachers' lives a lot easier, but also supports all students in learning as well. So I offer this data just again as we think about what's happened in mathematics education over the last 7 years. So our charge in this work is, first of all, to utilize the 2015 standards. So this is a revision. The other piece that we've charged our revision team is to ensure that the standards outline the grade level expectations for mathematics. And that third bullet is what I mentioned earlier when we think about entrance into post-secondary coursework without the need for remediation. And not just entry, but also being successful in that coursework as well. We want to continue to promote deeper learning in mathematics versus, we talked a little bit this morning about breadth versus depth. And then also continue to seek stakeholder input and feedback. We did a public input survey on the 2015 standards. We had about 250 to 300 responses about the perception of the current standards, and that's been able to inform our work thus far. Gosh, I'm sorry, this is a little small on the screen. So one of the things that, and I appreciate the work of the ad hoc committee thus far as we continue to work through the request of information from that particular committee, but one of the questions was really around, I'm going to say, checkpoints in our process. So I shared this with our revision team members a couple of weeks ago as we think about like this far left piece where we're really working to gather resources and data about mathematics education. And then there are multiple parts and pieces in this as well. And I do want to acknowledge too, this is, I think, something that the ad hoc committee will help us continue to think through as we go through this process as well. A unique feature for mathematics as an ELA is employer engagement. We hear very loudly from our employers around the expectations for mathematics in Nebraska's leading industries. Post-secondary institutions are critical in this work as well. And then those two arrows at the bottom, first, the continued ongoing communication with this board. I do want to remind that we have a running update in Spark of all of the information we've shared in committee and to the full board. We'll continue to add to that. And then we will also continue to work to incorporate and collect stakeholder feedback, including those from post-secondary education and from subject matter experts. We think that's a really critical part, not just, and also recognizing our educators are subject matter experts, but making sure that we continue to engage those with expertise in mathematics education throughout the process as well. I mentioned this last month, so we put out a call for applications in September to be a member of the revision team. You can see the minimum qualifications that were outlined in that process. We did an anonymous review of applications. We had over 130 individuals apply, and we selected about 30 individuals to be a part of the revision team. If you're interested in who those individuals are, it is posted in Spark, including their name, their school district, and their role within the school. We have representation from both public and non-public schools. We have representation from all ESUs except one. And they're also organized by grade band, so K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and then 3 groups for high school, data, geometry, and algebra. So this is our tentative timeline, and a couple things I'll just call your attention to. And one thing we chatted about in the committee today is that this is a high-level timeline because there are pieces in there that aren't called out explicitly in this high-level timeline. Some of them are occurring organically. Like this week, I think we had 3 teams meet at least once as they start working on those grade bands. Our hope would be to have a draft 1 by April. That's a pretty, I don't like the word aggressive, but a pretty quick timeline. But knowing that this is a revision and we have great staff leading the work, we're confident that we'll be able to get that done as well. Following that, there'll be additional opportunities for public input and work done throughout the summer with a final draft to you, again, tentatively in August, with a hope of having a vote by the state board in September. which would allow us to meet that 7-year timeline by the Nebraska statute. So again, our hope is probably each month, and Madam Chair, this is something we haven't talked about, but continue to update with the Teaching and Learning Committee each month, and we'll continue to add to the slides for this so the full board would have access as well, and continued communication with the full board as we move through the process.
Robin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say thank you to Corey, obviously, for this presentation. I want to emphasize to the rest of the board members, especially those who are not on the Teaching, Learning, Serving Committee, this is a great time to ask your questions. Because if we don't, then we get into this, oh, I didn't know this and that sort of thing. So really, I really want to emphasize it's a great time for all of us, especially those that are not in the committee, to be asking those questions of Corey and numerous other people who could also answer those questions. So just really work on that, look at that stuff in Spark. I think it'll help with our communication and our unity and our stability. I think those things are really important. Thank you.
Deborah?
Well, just on that line, I would be asking a million questions because that's who I am, but I have heard a number of presentations on that topic, and the results are incredible, and how we're helping students to be successful after graduation especially. And so thank you for your leadership in that. It's very exciting.
Corey, I have a quick question I didn't get a chance to ask in committee this morning. One of the things that I really liked that I saw up there was from one year to the next, the number of schools that moved to having high-quality instructional materials. Do you have any data that says, as they looked at their testing results, they realized, oh my gosh, we got to do something different? Or did they wait until their textbook review time was up to purchase new materials? Do you know any of that information? I'd be interested, but if you don't have it, I understand.
No, I think what's happened is also how we've talked about the role of standards in instruction and talking about them as one part. And what we're trying to utilize language that talks about moving beyond standards alignment, because folks will say, my textbook is aligned to the standards. But what we experienced this morning around mathematics is there are also these mathematical processes, similar to what we heard around the social emotional, needs and employer needs as well. So we've talked about standards plus instructional shifts. So what does a mathematics classroom look like? And what we're finding in the instructional materials market, that older materials don't reflect those complex practices and processes. Newer materials do. And that's for ELA, that's for mathematics, that's for science. So I think part of it has been the fact that the department has elevated the importance of high quality instructional materials. We're not mandating any materials, but what we are asking districts to do is really evaluate materials for quality, but also have a thorough process for selection, because we know that one set of materials won't work for every district. The instructional material should be culturally relevant. It should reflect the families and community of which that school is located. So there are some quality pieces we can start with, and then our work is also to support districts as they're going through that selection process. So I also just talking about ESSER funds. Districts are using ESSER funds to purchase new materials. I just had an email from a superintendent earlier this afternoon. They're buying K-12 materials for English language arts. They haven't been able to do that for a long time. So again, thinking about how they're leveraging that resource to support educators and school leaders, that's one way we're seeing districts leverage those resources.
Thank you.
Madam President?
Lisa?
This morning, you did a great job sharing with us information, but Deb, I wanted to, call her out as far as the wonderful job she did. I mean, we talked about so much that just clicked. And my question is there going to be training for at least K-5, 2 to 6 with her out there? I mean,
Yeah, and Deb always jokes that, like I said, we need to clone you. She's like, I don't think you want that. But what we've done with ELA, we're going to do with mathematics and create some rollout resources that obviously the department and build in cooperation with our ESUs. So we create some consistency, but they're one. So what we're really trying to do in that is like empower our ESUs to be able to facilitate that locally and our local districts as well,
Good.
because they're doing that. But what we're trying to do is create some efficiencies and consistency around messaging. Because I think that was been one of the previous challenges is everyone was kind of doing their own thing.
Yep.
But what we're doing is saying, here's the resources that reflect the statewide vision for mathematics or ELA. Customize it for your educators, but everyone doesn't need to be building the same ship, so to speak. So that's how I'm going to clone Deb, and we'll begin to think about the rollout of that as well.
because when she presented, I don't know.
I know Andrea's ready to go to Deb's class, she was saying.
Yeah,
So it was great.
for sure. I wish I would have had her as an elementary math teacher, so thank you.
Tutoring
both.
afterwards.
Anyone else? Okay. That brings us to the end of the report from Lisa. We're going to take a 10-minute break right now. So if we could reconvene at exactly 4 o'clock. Agenda item 6.5, the AQuEST Student Success Access and Support Domain Committee did not meet, therefore there is no report. Agenda item 6.6. As acting chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I will provide the report. The Budget and Finance Committee met earlier today. We did not have any discussion or action items to review. The committee did review the monthly board travel expense report and in-state travel authorizations and had no concerns. That concludes the report. Any questions? Agenda item 6.7. The Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee did not meet. Therefore, there is no report. Agenda item 7. Additional business. Agenda item 7.1. In accordance with Board Policy B9, set public comment time limits for Friday, December 3rd, 2021. Pursuant to Board Policy B9, I move to limit public comment at the Friday, December 3rd, 2021 meeting to end by 4 o'clock p.m., where each person may address the board for up to 2 minutes. The board may take a 45-minute lunch break announced at a time prior to recessing. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Maureen and seconded by Robin. Is there any discussion on the motion? Robin?
Is this consistent with what we have done in the past?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Patty?
I appreciate the consistency. Based on some of the comments that Robin made earlier about what he was hearing from people from Nebraska ASCD about what we could do for them, and one of those things is consistency. So it's not just for our public, but it's also for people that we serve and work with.
Anyone else? Andrea, please call the roll.
Morrison? Fricke?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Goebbels?
Yes?
Kojans?
Yes.
Neary?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
6 yes, 1 absent, 1 vacant.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 7.2. This is the consent agenda that Jacqueline Morrison asked to have pulled earlier, and because she had to leave early today, she has requested that the agenda item be held over till tomorrow. Is there any objection to this? Seeing none. Consent agenda item 7.2 will be held over till tomorrow's meeting. Agenda item 8, information items and reports. These items, 8.1 through 8.3, are information items and written reports for the board and for our information only. Agenda item 9, good of the order. This section of the agenda is intended for board members to offer informational observations of the work of the State Board. Board members may make brief announcements about attendance at future events for the purpose of informing other board members. No business or motions or suggested actions of the board may be offered at this point in the agenda, nor should board members engage in discussion about other agenda items or introduce new agenda items. Board members? Lisa?
Just one, because of the consent agenda item that Jacqueline had was already taken off. I didn't see it. Can you just tell me the theme of that consent agenda item?
Yeah, so
Commissioner?
it was item 5.3.A.
Oh, 5.3, okay.
From the consent agenda, and so that was contract extension for the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation relative to shared staff that we would actually have, so.
Okay, thank
You can
you.
look that up, yeah.
Anything else? Agenda item 10. Thank you for those who attended in person and tuned into the broadcast. The State Board of Education will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. in this room for a business meeting. Meeting is adjourned.